So, hi Gaiti.
Hi Gita.
I'm so glad that you've agreed to do this conversation.
I'm very happy to do it.
Thank you. So, Gaiti, I think what is distinct about this conversation is that I'm trying to bring in feminist perspectives on various aspects of women's experience in science, but also science in general. Yeah? And I think the two important concepts that we use is the concept of gender and also the concept of patriarchy, to try and see whether science as a social institution, reproduces any of these, and if it does, how it does. That's the kind of thrust. So let me start, Gaiti, by asking you this question. The general impression of science is that it's a value-neutral space, right? And empirically, what we see, of course, in the question of who gets to do science, for instance, you see that there is a huge disparity. And so you see the domination of a particular community, you see a particular gender. You don't see it as being a very democratic space. So women, for example, have to face the glass ceiling, the asbestos ceiling, and all of those. How do you look at this issue?
So, it's very nice to think that, science is a very sort of equal and flat kind of area to be working in. But finally, how can you remove science from the society that it's working in? The people who do science belong to a certain society, and that society will influence the way they think and the way they function. You cannot remove completely from the professional space what is the personal space of the scientist, right? It's not possible to completely alienate the two. So inevitably what you're saying will happen. And I'm talking about science in India, science abroad too, but let's stay with India for the moment. India is a very patriarchal society. It's a very gender discriminatory society. So it's not at all surprising to me that all of these aspects come into science as well. And the only way that one can deal with it is to be very conscious of it. And I'm glad you're bringing this up, that, both the scientists and, the people who sort of administer science are conscious of it and are, make a special effort to overcome these things. Otherwise, it's not going to change.
Yeah, the scientific mind per se is not sufficient in itself.
Exactly, right? Exactly. You cannot take, the mind is the mind. You can say it's a scientific mind, but finally the effect of society on a person is also there, and it will always be there. Right. So people have to make a conscious effort to actually, delineate the two and then try and see that they are not, discriminating or taking their patriarchal values or their gender discriminatory values into science.
But it is happening.
It is happening, for sure. But that is what one has to be conscious of and try and get people to understand, and then try and get people to change and try and put in systems which will allow it to change.
Allow them a lot more awareness.
Absolutely. Awareness and systems is what is needed in that context.
The second kind of thing that we in feminist science studies, Gaiti, try to look at is not just who gets to do science and who doesn't, but also the question of how the disciplines are structured themselves in a certain kind of a hierarchy, which we argue is a gendered hierarchy also. So if you put physics on top of the hierarchy and biology at the lower end. In social sciences, we do that with economics and sociology, right? The more exact, the more abstract the discipline is, the harder it is. We think that it is much more suited for men. It's much more masculine in that sense. Do you think this happens? For example, as a biologist, how do you
I think it does. I think the numbers speak for themselves. If you look at it, there are very, very much fewer women physicists and women mathematicians than there are women biologists. So for sure it's happening. There's no doubt about that.
That is certain. And this sort of reflects in many ways, including at the school level.
Yes, absolutely. I think girls get pushed into certain kinds of disciplines. All of that is, there's no, I think there's, I would find it hard that anybody could argue against that.
And often the argument is that no, this is not really gender discrimination or gender construction. It's only a question of merit. It's what the talent that women show, the talent that men show.
I don't think that's correct. Yeah, I think there is definitely a pressure on girls to go into certain areas.
Yeah.
First of all, there is a pressure on girls not to do science at all, and I think that's definitely the case. And then over and above that, I think in the scientific disciplines itself, there's
So, but let's look back a little bit and dive into your personal archive. What was it like for you as a girl child? Where did you grow up? What was your experiences of how did you come to science? What, if you could just share some of those?
Sure, no, I'm happy to share that. So I think I've been exceptionally lucky in the fact that I always had a mother who worked right from when I can remember, and so the idea that you grow up and that you have a family life, but that you also work was very deeply ingrained in me from very, very early on. So it was never considered that you get married and you stop working. That was never an option that was even brought up.
What did your mother do?
My mother used to teach English.
English.
Yeah, she taught English, And my father was a doctor. And somehow, they really left my sisters and me to take our own decisions on what we wanted to do. If anything, my father was a little against the idea of any of us going into medicine. He somehow didn't like the idea too much. I think he felt that, so he actually, I think, felt that he would have perhaps liked to have been a scientist himself. And so he was quite keen that his daughters go into science.
I see. Okay.
And my mother was, she was like, you do what you find interesting. It's up to you.
And where was this? Where did you?
So I originally grew up in my early years, I was in Srinagar, Kashmir. I grew up there, and then I was in Aligarh for all my schooling. Yeah, I was
schooling
in Aligarh.
And college? Was it
no,
also?
College I went to Delhi. I studied in Delhi.
Okay, so Srinagar, Aligarh, Delhi.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And how was it at school? Because we do, research does indicate that even a gender sort of a bias comes in the school classroom, the science classroom, the science syllabus, the kind of role modeling that happens. Things are changing now, of course, but the kind of role modeling that happens is that, women are shown or represented as doing secondary work even in a laboratory or in science. Men are the one who are the, forerunners of science. How was it for you at school?
So it was actually interesting because I went into a school which was a relatively new school, and it was it was a convent school, which was unusually for a convent. It was a co-ed. It was a co-ed. It's a co-educational institution, and so it had both boys and girls, and because it was in the slightly conservative city of Aligarh.
Yeah.
So as we grew older, the girls were one by one taken away into other schools where there were no boys. And
particularly when they hit puberty.
That's right. When they hit puberty, they moved away into schools where they were. So by the time I reached, class 9th, which is where, you sort of decide whether you're doing science, arts, at that time, that's how it was. I was the only girl in my class.
I see.
There were only, apart from me, there were, 3 or 4 other boys. That's
and
it.
How was that? How was that experience?
It was a little lonely because, all my friends had left. But apart from that, there was no real issue in the school because we actually had some excellent women science teachers. And my biology teacher, she was a nun. She was excellent. And, and the physics teacher, Mrs. Naqvi, was also very, very good. So as a result of that, there was no sort of feeling that, I can't do science or something. That feeling was not there. And both my sisters had done science before me. So I think I had an aptitude for doing science more than I had for social science. So I just sort of drifted into it, I should say.
Yeah. That's wonderful because often, many girls are not privileged.
No, so that's what I'm saying. All the girls who were in my class, they didn't even have an option. They were all sent away to a school where there was very little science taught to girls at all. So they were all in the university school where, even if they had wanted to, I think there was no option for them. Yeah, exactly. So that option was taken away from them very early on. Exactly.
And very often you see, not always, but very often we see that the all-girls school, stop emphasizing on the
Science.
teaching of
Yeah,
science.
yeah,
and
exactly,
mathematics
exactly,
to that
exactly.
extent,
Yeah,
sort
yeah,
of,
yeah.
Make it more suited to what the girls should
Right,
be.
right, right.
Yeah. So then from school, how was college, and how did you choose to do biology? Take us through that.
So I mean, biology. I guess I just found it interesting. Yeah, it was there
More
was
than
no
physics,
sort of
maybe.
more than physics. Yeah, exactly. I just found it interesting. Also, there was one factor which played into it, which is that in school it turned out that they never managed to get a maths teacher. For
Oh, I
doing
see.
high.
I see.
So we had physics, we had chemistry, we had biology, but we didn't have a maths teacher, and they just that's just one of those
That
things they could.
becomes
Yeah, so that becomes limiting because then you
yeah.
can't. You can either do biology or chemistry. You really
Right.
can't do physics
Physics
without
without.
having done school maths.
Right.
So that sort of limited my options a little bit.
Okay.
But I chose biology, and I've been very
And
happy
college
with
was
that.
in
Yeah.
Delhi.
And college was in Delhi.
How
That's
was
right.
Delhi?
Yeah, yeah.
Moving from
Delhi
Ahmedabad.
was it was nice. I mean, I had a lot of family in Delhi, so I was familiar with Delhi as such. But yeah, living in Delhi, living in hostel was a very nice, very different experience. Yeah, I enjoyed it very much. Yeah, and also getting to know. So one of the things I think that I really enjoyed about college was that one could meet. One was one had a lot of friends in the science sector, but because I lived in a hostel, there were a large number of friends that I had which were in the social sciences.
Right.
So this understanding of what is
That
social
really
sciences,
helps.
and it makes a big difference early on in your life, And that was the case in my undergraduate, which was in Miranda House.
Yeah.
And similarly in my master's, which was in JNU. I mean, JNU, in fact, the science component was very small. The social science component was much bigger. And so, I was exposed hugely to, people who were doing economics, who were doing sociology, who were doing political science.
Yeah.
And it's I think as a young person, when you're doing science, to be able to relate to people who work in other areas which are not the same as yours, it's a very opening of the mind experience.
Absolutely.
And
I think
very essential. And I think it's something that needs to be continued as much as possible.
Strengthened.
Yeah, strengthened. Absolutely.
Because the strength of the university is that you tend to meet. And this is
Exactly,
true, for example, for us in the social
Exactly.
sciences
Absolutely,
also.
absolutely.
That you tend to meet people from the sciences, you tend to meet people from,
Correct.
finance backgrounds.
Yeah.
It's an interesting terrain.
Yeah.
But in research institutes exclusively dedicated to science research, I think this experience is lost, right?
It is lost, yeah. So, I was lucky that I went off to do a PhD in Cambridge, and which again, because I was living in a college there, you don't live, you're not sort of trust. And the university is again very big.
Yeah.
So again, I had a lot of friends that were not doing science,
And how?
And so up till that level, I always interacted with people who were essentially both scientists and non-scientists.
And how do you think that helped you? Suppose if I were to sort of probe a little deeper.
I think it definitely helps you to realize that there are aspects of society which are very complex and which science cannot answer everything, So the tendency that scientists tend to have is that, we pursue a problem and we can solve it. The fact is that many of those problems have issues that are related to the way society functions, and unless you develop an understanding of that, you can't really be a very effective scientist either. And that is what I think it helped me to understand.
Yeah. And even
years.
in our personal lives, no, you would say that did it sort of help?
Definitely, yeah, definitely. I think personal life too. I think exactly. What the choices one makes, the friends one makes, and then the kind of people one interacts with, the kind of students one is able to handle. I think all of that, a lot of it depends on your early growth as a.
Yeah, so I think you're right, absolutely, that we do need to strengthen these kind of dialogues where people can come together.
Absolutely essential. Absolutely essential if you want to have science actually impact society in any way.
Yeah.
You cannot do it if you just have it tucked away in an exclusive ivory tower where you don't interact with anybody and you just think that, if I do science, that's it. It's not going to, maybe you will get some phenomenal findings, and you'll do that. And, your scientists, your peers in science will be very appreciative.
Yeah.
But your impact on society is going to be very limited in the process.
And even as citizens or even as people, human beings in the society, I think that exposure probably to what is happening in social movements, what is happening in the social sciences,
Absolutely.
also will help, I think, the scientists themselves
Absolutely.
to become, more humane.
More, whole sort of personalities.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I agree with you.
So from there, you went to TF.
Then after my PhD, I went to 1983 winter. I joined TIFR. That's right.
TIFR Bombay.
TIFR Bombay.
And that's where you did your.
That's where I did my postdoc, and then I stayed on and with a job there.
And then then you went for a short.
Then I took a short
US.
sabbatical. I took a short sabbatical and went and spent 2 years in Brandeis in Michael Rospash's lab, where I started a project, which is what I then continued in my own lab subsequently.
So how was it in that context in the US? For example, going as a woman, but going as a woman from India, post-colonial society. What was your experience over there?
I must say I had an excellent experience in the US. I really enjoyed myself. So by then I was married.
Yeah.
And so, we lived away from campus completely.
Okay.
So that was nice. And it was, American society at that point was I think quite different from now. I haven't been for a while now, but it was very, and especially Boston was very open to, people sort of moving around, meeting people.
Yeah.
So I enjoyed it very much, I must say. And the lab was, exceptionally, friendly and nice lab.
You were fortunate and privileged enough not to experience, say, racism of any kind.
No,
Subtle,
the lab didn't have. I'm sure there might have been, but one didn't. The lab didn't have it for sure. I think that I can say for certainty.
Yeah.
I'm sure there were, them, and I can't remember them now. I'm sure there must have been issues of
Subtly,
racism here and there. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But I had lived in Cambridge before that, and one had already seen some levels of racism there in some form or the other. So one learns to sort of,
navigate.
Yeah, and the thing is, at some level, I was not planning to stay on in the US anyway.
Okay.
So to me, it was more an experience, and gaining from the science in one of the top labs in the country. So it was
Must have been
fantastic
quite
experience. Fantastic
but
experience.
You always wanted to come back.
Yeah, I did actually. Yeah, strangely enough, I did. Yes. Yeah.
And what was that impulse? What was that?
I don't know. I think I had this feeling that having spent some time in TIFR. I had spent time in TIFR earlier as well when I was doing my master's in JNU. I could see that was a place where one could actually have the freedom to do what you wanted, and that there was an effort to actually bring world-class science into the context of India.
Of course.
So I guess that seemed exciting at that time. Right. Yeah, and one wanted to do it.
Also a sense of home, right?
And a sense of home. Sure, absolutely. That was always there. Yeah, that was always there. The fact that you want to be among your own people. Yeah, exactly.
No? That is always one of the biggest driving forces for us to come
back. But
back.
I think that combined with the fact that at that point I definitely felt that one could actually do world-class science. And that there was the impetus and the support was there from the
from the state, from the community,
from everybody. To actually do that. So that with that feeling you want to come back and do it.
I know. Yes. That was wonderful. And then you moved to NCBS in 1990.
So NCBS was, the talk of NCBS came up in TIFR with Obaid and Vijay in the late 80s, 88 or so.
Right.
And I was asked whether I would move, and I said yes, absolutely. But then I decided to go for this, sabbatical to Michael's lab, to the US. So when NCBS actually came up in Bangalore, I was away in the US. And then when I came back from the US, then I was sort of transitioned for 1 year between Bombay, because I already had a lab in Bombay. I transitioned between Bombay and Bangalore for a year, and then completely moved here in 1993.
Lovely. Yeah. So Gaiti, about becoming a professional biologist, professional scientist, you've been here now, what?
A long time. Yeah, that's right. Long,
How has it been? I mean, as a professional scientist,
yeah.
what have been the challenges for you as a woman?
So,
have there been any? If there are, what?
Yeah, no, I think the challenges have been, the same as what I would think most other people have, which is that, you need to do your science, but you also need to publicize it. You need to talk about it outside to be able to get sufficient funding to do what you want to do. And finally, at some point, if you value the kind of science you do, then you want to be able to take decisions regarding that at a broader level.
Yeah.
And that is always a challenge. I think women in general, I think, don't automatically go into decision-making positions. And so that is something that has always been the case. And I think it continues to be. I think there's a tendency to keep women out of decision-making positions. And that is throughout, this is throughout the world. So it's not just here. It's definitely true in India, but it's also true across the world. That plays out. And that is something
that it's patriarchal.
Exactly. Yeah, it's patriarchal, exactly. And so,
has it bothered you?
It has bothered me a little bit, yes.
Yeah.
But it hasn't bothered me enough to stop me from doing anything.
Correct.
I've mostly done, in the scientific world, I've done whatever I wanted to do.
Okay.
And I've pushed ahead, and I've managed to always get the
so you
funding
didn't let
needed.
that sort of dampen your
I didn't
scientific...
let that dampen me, yeah, exactly. And at least my scientific career, I didn't let it affect me at all. Yeah.
And what is your understanding or view on things like individual awards, which, I've talked about earlier, that we need to sort of rethink the idea?
I think in India, it's definitely the individual awards are all run by small cliques.
Yes.
That's my interpretation of it, at least. So I think it's almost
very well established that that's the way it happens.
So it's run by small cliques, and it's I don't see it changing.
No?
It's not changing, not that I can see it, at least. Yeah.
And there seems to be such an
And even now, with the current dispensation, I think a lot of awards have been done away with. So I'm not sure what's going to come now. I have no idea really.
Happen.
Yeah, what's going to happen? Yeah, maybe something better will come. It's possible. One should not be completely sort of negative.
No, not at all.
I think it's possible that maybe something better will be worked out. But for sure, in the past, throughout my career at least, I think awards were all run by cliques.
Yeah, and therefore, obviously, women found it harder to get it.
Women have always found it harder as a result. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, and that doesn't at all reflect on their ability or their work or their merit.
I would assume not. Yeah, I would assume not. Yeah.
It just is sort of this aura that, it's only the meritorious that make it. Firstly, it's such a problematic idea to say that it's only one of the individuals. And then this whole discourse of merit makes it more complicated. Yeah. So, I want to take you to another issue that we in feminism are concerned about, is how women in science are getting constructed by, say, the scientific community itself. So I often get to hear that, women in science become more toxic, they become more masculine, they become more harder. And, why are they becoming like that? And because the onus of changing that is put on women. And my argument has always been, but it's not the fault of the women. In order to survive there, in the kind of culture that scientific institutions have, you have to be competitive, you have to be doubly so, you have to be, appear to be stronger, harder. So it's very natural for them to become much, much more, apparently more toxic. Do you think that?
So I can see what you're saying, that women, if pushed in, when they go into these kind of positions, they sometimes become much more toxic. In fact, probably I can think of several examples where that's true. But I am not convinced that it's only the fact that they have. I think women should be more conscious of this and really try and be a little more balanced about this. So I wouldn't put the onus completely on the outside. I would put some onus on women also in not being able to handle this, I think. Because, why would you allow an outside situation to change your own personality at some level, or the way you function, you know.
Or your
Why
values.
should, or your values, exactly. Why would you allow that to happen? I mean, you need to be stronger, I think. I mean, I guess not everybody is, and maybe that's why this happens, but it seems to me a bit of a wimping out kind of a thing by saying that, you know, it's all because of outside.
I see what you're saying. I see. I think I was just trying to draw attention to the fact that this kind of a behavior is taken to be normal amongst men and seen as...
That, there I agree with you. There I agree with you, yes. That, if men behave like that, it is considered normal. If women behave like that, it's not considered. There I agree with you. But I think almost everybody who gets into positions of power quite often ends up having some toxic traits.
I think what you're saying is actually interesting, that it's not just women, but men also need to be
equally,
of,
absolutely.
The kind of toxic cultures that they reproduce.
And in fact, that toxic culture has, I mean, given that most of science is a culture that is driven by scientists who are mostly men, I mean, the culture is also, and competitive men, the culture is driven by them. And so, I guess women who get into that culture will become competitive. I mean, will need to get it. So the idea then is, I think the only solution to this, if there is a solution, is to not have this kind of a culture, if it's possible.
If it's possible, and I'm sure it is if we really work towards
if one works
at least we can hope for
it.
The other thing that happens, I think we noticed to women in science is that, or women in academics also, largely, is that you are expected to mother. You know, you're expected to be very kind, caring, compassionate, mothering. That is also a problem because you're reproducing certain kind of social roles for women.
Right.
You know? I mean, that we are expected to mother, we don't want to. You know,
no, absolutely. I completely agree with you, and I really don't. I mean, that's not something that I think is
something.
It's not
midway.
I mean, I think a woman should be able to lead a scientific life just like anybody else. You know, just like a normal professional person. And
bring values of care and compassion.
Exactly. I mean, I think just as women should be caring and compassionate, so should the men PIs be caring and compassionate.
In the way that labs are run, in the way,
absolutely.
You know? And
I mean, there is a certain, there should be a certain equal way of doing these things, and I don't think it should matter whether you're a man or a woman.
So, how has it been mentoring younger people in your laboratory for so many years now? What are the kind of principles that you have?
So one thing I try and do is that, you know, try and be as open as possible with everybody, you know. So don't try and do things behind each other's backs.
Lovely.
You know, so that is one very important
thing.
Builds
trust. In that sense.
Yeah, exactly. Build trust. I mean, I work with people who I trust. You know, students that I trust. You know, I trust them the way they do things. And if and within them there should not be a trust deficit either.
Right.
You know? That's very important.
Right.
So that is one of the main things, I think, that one tries to, you know, build up.
I think that helps a long way to go against, you know, like an antidote to the kind of very competitive and untrusting cultures.
Exactly.
That we live in,
Exactly.
Gaiti, I'll come to another important point. That is that very often, and through your experience or in general, if you can think about it, very often the argument given for a low representation of women in science is that, it's the family responsibilities. That, you know, and our effort in FSS, Feminist Science Studies, has been to say, that's true. That's true for the entire population. But we need to turn the spotlight on saying that what is wrong with science? You know, what is science doing, scientific institution doing to keep women out? How has it been for you in terms of family and...
So, I think, I mean, there's no doubt about the fact that scientific institutions have to be more supportive of women when they start working. You know, they have to provide, you know, support for children. Creches are absolutely essential. And for sure, I think I would have had a very difficult time, both me and my husband, actually.
Both of you.
Because we share equally. And the fact is, both of us would have had a problem if there hadn't been a creche on campus. You know, it was important. And I would think that most people who have had young children will say the same thing. I mean, and our creche is used hugely. So, I mean, that kind of support is needed.
When did the
creche came up very soon after we moved to the new campus. Very soon after that. Came up very early on.
And that has been
It's been a great thing, absolutely. And I mean, I think other places have them as well, but certainly I think NCBS was one of the
Yeah,
earlier ones
earlier
to,
ones
to
to do
develop
this,
something
yeah.
like that. Yeah.
And Gaiti, you've had an interfaith marriage, an inter-community, inter-caste marriage, and you've also told me about how wonderful your relationship with your mother-in-law has been.
Right. Yeah.
How has that
So that
been?
I think again, so the thing is that when men go into science, it's assumed that everybody is going to support them
Right.
from the other side. So when women go into science, it should be equally assumed that everybody will support them, right? So the idea that a woman should go into science and then do everything else at home and also be doing science. I mean, why is it true for women and not true for men? I mean, men are not doing everything at home and doing science. So why should women be doing everything at home and also doing science? So there has to be family support for the woman as well. And it's absolutely essential. And I mean, that's the only way that you're going to get women to go into science and, continue to flourish in science if there is family support. And I've always said this, I mean, from very early on that, for me at least, definitely a supportive family made all the difference. That's how I could continue to, do what I wanted to do.
And we recognize this, whereas men take it for granted.
Exactly.
They have the support, they have all the freedom to become geniuses.
Exactly.
But it's taken for granted, whereas we need to underline.
We need to underline it. So that which is, I mean, so that's when I say that, you need a support, a family support for a woman. But it's not that you need it only, I mean, you anyway get it for men, you should also have it for women. I mean, that's what I'm saying. If you want everything to be equal,
a given.
It should be a given. Exactly.
Whereas we have to fight for it.
One has to keep saying it again and again. Precisely.
So now coming back to a rather, superficial question, but I think it's very significant for us, is to talk about the presentation of self. Many academic women are expected to present their self in rather, I would say, degendered way, where they are not supposed to be very feminine in their ways of dressing, walking, talking. You're supposed to become, how should I say, simpler, more colorless kind of pressures. And I think women in science are also reporting that if they dress in a particular way, the younger women particularly, they're not taken seriously. Or if they talk in a particular way, they're not taken seriously. What do you think about this?
I'm not sure. I've never felt it. Let's just say that. I've never felt it. I think I've always worn what I like and dressed the way I like throughout. And I mean, depending on the situation, I make my choice on whether I want to, dress in a particular way or not. And it's something that I've really not. I've never noticed it. I'm sure it's there. I'm sure people do notice it, but I have. It's not something that has.
Or probably we also learn to internalize it. No, we also learn
possibly. I'm not sure.
No?
I really don't know. I'm not
it's
sure
not
about
explicit,
it.
but do you
it's
think?
Not. I'm not really. I must say I've never felt it. It's true that, when I go abroad, I always dress in Western clothes. But that's also partly because it's not very comfortable wearing a sari or a shalwar kameez and walking around, trying to sort of jumping into buses or whatever, things like that. And it's cold. So, you want to wear warmer clothes. So, it's just a natural way of doing things. I can't say that
there's
no
need to try to be Indian or traditional.
Not at all. Not at all. I never feel the need for that, and it's just not very practical anyway.
Maybe not in NCBS, but in other institutions, women do report that if there is, for example, a conference or an event and things like that, and when it comes to lamp lighting.
It's always the women who are asked to light it in traditional saris. Yes, that's true. No, so we luckily don't have the lamp lighting tradition.
You don't have it.
We don't have the tradition, so I must say I've managed to escape that one. Completely.
And coming to a more deeper and a more difficult problem is the question of sexual harassment in scientific institutions. So during the #MeToo movement, we all who are familiar with scientific campuses know that the whispers are there, that it's present, but it doesn't get talked about. Why? What is your understanding?
I think the main reason is that the people who get sexually harassed know that they are at the receiving end, and that if anything comes out, they are the ones who are going to suffer, not the person who's doing the harassment. And this is we do not have a way of actually dealing with sexually harassing men. or women actually. I mean, there could be women too, I suppose. I don't know. In my experience, I don't know. But for sure, sexually harassing men, there is no way that the system in our scientific establishment is able to deal with them.
Yeah,
there's nothing.
Despite the fact that there is the Posh Act, you're supposed to have
nothing works. For one thing, a lot of the women who get harassed are students, are graduate students or postdocs or whatever, and they're working. So their careers depend on the person who's doing the sexual harassment. Yeah. So they would rather just finish and get out. That is usually the attitude.
They are told to do that.
Exactly.
In fact, one thing that came out uniquely, which I've been talking about during the Me Too movement about scientific institutions, was the following. And that if a female student or research scholar in a PI decides to report a case of sexual harassment against the PI, say in the third or fourth year of their thesis, they lose access to all the data that they've been working on, all the work that they've been working on. And so if they're reassigned to another laboratory, they have to start from scratch.
Yeah, that would be the case, because the thing is that the other laboratory would not.
That's such a big deterrent.
Yeah, of course it's a big deterrent. Yeah, it's very difficult. Yeah.
So maybe there's something there to think about.
Oh, definitely. There has to be a way of dealing with it, but our systems have not really been able to figure out how to deal with it. Yeah. I mean, what I've actually at one point, when I was talking about this to some people, and I suggested one of the things is that you should just cut grants to that person, stop giving them grants, just make it clear that, given these kind of cases against you, because it's very difficult in our system to actually ask somebody to leave, unless you have a case. But for sure, if there are sufficient number of harassment cases that have been put against somebody, then, just say that, look, there are so many cases against you, perhaps, you can't be given grants or something. There should be some way, some disincentive, some deterrent should be there.
Something like that, so that it doesn't become a pattern.
Exactly. So almost certainly in most cases it is a pattern.
Yeah. And, people get away.
Yeah.
And I think some amount of collectivization probably, and unfortunately have to happen with the women. Like the creches. No, I guess creches, men and women fought for and managed to get them. But instituting ICs, I think, is probably as much a priority today.
Yeah.
So, I'll take you to slightly more wider questions about the role of science in modern science, particularly in modern societies. While we know that it has been a very important institution of progress and modernization, we also know that it has produced a lot of risks, whether it is through the production of the atomic bomb, whether it's through the production of, the kind of ravaging, unsustainable use of nature to overpower, to control. We as feminists argue that this is simultaneous with the control of women and gender. It happens together. Nature is also controlled, feminized, and women are also controlled and feminized. But what it has produced is a very risk-laden society because it comes out of the impulse to power, overpower, and control. Do you think that there is another way of doing science? Is there another way that is already happening? How do you look at it? Where perhaps we think of nature in more connected ways?
So I think this goes back to my original thing, that science should be much more linked to what is happening in society and how society functions. So, for example, if you're saying that nature is being demolished, and the fact is that a lot more of science should be, people who do science should be able to understand the environment around them, what is, how it's playing about sustainability.
And that's happening.
It's happening, but is it happening at the scale at which people who do science? And again, we're talking only about science. What about the huge numbers of people who do technology?
No.
What about them? They are not even doing science. They're doing only technology, and they're doing no social science at all. You know, how are they going to come to an understanding of what is going on around them? You know, and how
what needs to be changed?
How their lifestyles, their decisions on what they do, how that is impacting the world around them, in what way, the environment, what, you know, the society. How is that happening? So it goes back to the same thing, that, you know, you cannot think of science as one thing. You have to think of it in the context of everything else. And unless one starts doing that,
and
absolutely,
corporates and the capitalists who are part of this nexus.
They are part of this nexus, and unless you have scientists who are, you know, able to look at a broader perspective and speak up for it and say that, look, you know, this is a decision that is not going to go well. It might be immediately, you know, looking very good, but it's not going to go well in the long run. In 10 years' time, you're going to face this problem. Unless you have people who are able to do that and speak up for it. It's not going to change. I mean, you know, we are on a destructive path.
And this kind of collectivization doesn't happen, no? Even in the scientific community.
No, it doesn't.
Because I think the way we've taught to do science is that it's an individual thing.
Exactly.
That, you know, it's about me and my research and finding
exactly, which is what I'm arguing against. That, you know, you have to look out beyond that. You know, you have to look beyond that, and that has to. It can't be done on individual scientist level. It has to be taught, and it has to be in the system.
It has to be taught
within
the system.
Within the
That's
system.
so true.
Exactly.
That's so true. And I think that will probably happen if you bring the silos together. Like people say. You know, rather
absolutely.
than thinking what has happened today, science has started being this very safe space for the governments and the state, because unfortunately those science is supposed to critique. It's become the safe space.
Absolutely.
Whereas the social science has become the
critiquing space.
Spaces. So Gaiti, tell us a little bit about your work. What is it that you actually work on? It would be a delight to hear you.
So I sort of began studying, trying to understand how there's a mechanism in cells that, you know, takes place when you get signals from outside. The cell receives a signal from outside. It causes changes within the cell. And my interest was that what is the biological context of this change? You know, so you study cells and you know that these things are happening in individual cells. The point is that, you know, it happens in cells, but cells are part of a whole organism.
Exactly.
Right? So the question is then that if this particular mechanism, how does it affect the whole organism? What is it that it does to the whole organism, and how and why does it do it? So that is what we've been studying all through. We began by studying it in a small organism called the fruit fly, Drosophila, because the particular mechanism was, you know, one could use a lot of the methods that are used in Drosophila to question what we wanted to do. But as we started doing this work, we realized that, you know, this whole mechanism is, of course, I mean, it's working in fruit flies in a particular way. And what we understood was that it affects certain aspects of brain function, which was not known. And then that as a result of that, you know, there are defects in terms of the way the insects are able to fly, essentially. You know, they're not able to fly very well. But from the cellular understanding of that we knew what were the changes that were happening, we realized that it's possible that some of these changes are also happening in mammalian, in human neurons. You see?
I see.
So we then started working, maybe about 10 to 12 years ago, we started using human sort of stem cell derived neurons to try and see whether some of the answers that we had got on Drosophila, whether those also worked in human neurons. You know, did those questions, if you ask the same questions, did you get similar answers?
And did you?
And we did. That is the amazing thing. So that was really nice. And it took us a long time.
This is not a simple extrapolation that you've studied the fruit fly and now you're saying it applies to human stem cells. You actually
we actually did it. Yeah, we actually did it because so in science also there are hierarchies, and people who study human neurons and human neuronal biology are very reluctant to agree that what the findings one gets in Drosophila could actually apply there.
I see.
So I mean, there's a large number of people who obviously understand that this is the case, but in general, I would say it's not. So anyway, we decided to take the challenge and we said, okay, if it's happening in Drosophila and we think it's happening in neurons, why don't we do it in human neurons as well?
Okay.
So we did, and as I said, we did find that. And then from that, what's happened over time, I realized is that the changes in human neurons are probably leading to a certain kind of neurodegenerative disorder.
Okay.
If they don't function
Okay.
properly.
Okay.
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 So what I've got interested in now is to try and understand how this mechanism affects the health of neuronal cells in humans.
And would you also be thinking of how it can be corrected?
So unless you understand, whether it actually happens, then one, only then can one start thinking of correction.
Intervention.
Yeah, exactly, intervention.
Yeah.
So sort of at this, kind of the tail end of my career, I think this is what I'm looking forward to doing, because so I'm just beginning this work.
Yeah, and I enjoy those big shelves with this little food for fruit fly everywhere.
They look nice.
I've been
Yeah.
very fascinated by those. But so, will I be wrong or too simplistic if I were to say that your approach to the study of the cellular and is probably more holistic in terms of its the way you look at the cell, not in isolation but in connection?
Yeah, I think that's correct. I think I've always done that. I think we've always, and all the people from my lab, I think this is something that we've always sort of wanted to do, is that, and they've, I think, imbibed this aspect, that when you look at a cell, it's fine, but you really need to understand how this impacts physiology, behavior,
right,
in an organism.
So would you agree that it is less reductive than other?
I would think so. Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
I mean, we do the reductionism, but we try and put the reductionism in the context of the whole organism also.
Absolutely.
And that is something that's been very, very important as far as I'm concerned throughout my career. And I'm still doing that. And as I said, now we've sort of moved into taking it to human disease.
Yeah. Being reductive, I guess, is a mode of analysis. But what we do with it is
so the thing is, like when you say that, can you find a way to cure something? You can only find a way to cure something by doing the reductionism, because you need to know the nitty-gritty to be able to do something there.
Yeah,
but finally, of course, it will impact the whole organism, right?
Point is not to stop there and
point is,
it's to see a holistic whole picture.
I mean, different people, enjoy doing it in different ways. So a lot of people stop there, and that's, I'm sure they do a lot more of the details of the reductionist approach also, and that is also required, I'm sure. So different people have different ways. I've always enjoyed doing it at the level of taking it from the molecular to the organism, all the way. Molecular, cellular, and then organism. So that's always been my interest.
And a very simplistic jump here. Do you think it has anything to do with the fact that you're a woman? You tend to see the relational holistic. I'm tempted to jump to that conclusion.
No, I don't know if I could say that. I'm not sure. I know many, men who have the similar, have a similar way of doing things. So I think that would be too reductive.
I know. That's what Keller says about Barbara McClintock also. She says the kind of work that McClintock did cannot be simply explained in terms of her being a woman, because other men can also do it. But the point is to look at it in this holistic way is a feminist project. It's not about men or women doing it. Just different.
Maybe.
Now, I'll end with the last question.
Tell me.
If you are completely allowed the freedom to rid yourself of all ties, responsibilities, etc., and pursue your science single-mindedly, would you want?
So I would have maybe, 20 years ago, I would have probably said yes.
Yes.
But I think at this point, I quite enjoy doing my science and doing a lot of other things. I really do.
Like
and
what?
So, I like spending time with my family. I like spending time with my friends. I like traveling. And I enjoy sort of, just reading books and things like that. So, I would, at this point, I would not, and I actually enjoy certain aspects of science, which are, in a sense, being able to help people, to sort of take their work forward, or, just talking to them. Just sort of more administrative kind of work. I don't mind doing some of that as well.
Let me take you back to that 20-year-old. Back to 20 years back when you would have. Could you talk a little bit about why?
I think that was Mainly because at that point you're sort of, you're really trying to get ahead.
Yeah.
And you feel that, all this administrative stuff and all that you're doing is just a waste of time, and it's just a thing. But I think,
or even your family and other
even
things are
families,
just,
exactly. I mean, can they just, take care of themselves? Do I have to be there all the time? That kind of thing. But with time, I realized that, I mean, all that has value. All that has value, and I would not
makes our life
change
richer.
it. Yeah, it makes our life richer. So at this point, I would say no. I'm fine with the way I am.
And would you say this to your young students and research scholars?
I do actually. Yeah, I do tell them.
Lovely.
I say, take time off. Don't just spend all your time here. I mean, take time off. Take your weekend. Go do something
go watch
else.
a play,
exactly. Do something.
Take a walk.
Yeah, whatever you like
fun.
doing. Just do that. Don't overdo it. In fact, I also tell them, don't. I mean, I've always said this. Do not work late nights. It's not a good idea. I mean, some of them like to work late night, and I always say, don't do that. It's not. I mean, it's not at all. Productive.
Sundays, they just, I mean...
Even though I have to say I did quite a lot of it myself when I was younger. But I think, just being a bit more organized and a bit more able to lead another life, I think it brings a certain richness to your, life and to the way you, perceive science.
Yeah.
So it's important.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that wisdom, which I think is a very important wisdom for feminists.
Thank you.
Also.
Thank you.
Thank you, Gaiti.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
Bye-bye. Is there anything else you'd like to say?
No, that's fine. Yeah, not at all. No.
Thank you so much.
It's been fun.
Yeah, I know. Okay. And we hope that this conversation will go to a lot of younger people.
Yeah, I hope so too. Yeah.